tough, oh, you're so tough. You're so tough, oh, you're so. You're so, you like it too.
Hello and welcome to Average Takes, where we talk about a specific topic with a friend of mine. A friend of mine is super awesome. We've had her on the show a couple of times, and it's always enlightening. SeaAphrodite, financial, awesome person, a mom, a wife. Domina, thanks for coming to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, I mean, I'm sure people are just itching to hear from you again, and you came up with this topic that I think I've read a little bit about it, but just you've done this, you have a lot of people you do this with, and the topic is male chastity and slash caging. Do you want to expand a bit more on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course. So, I mean, male chastity in general is just denial, right? It's this sort of like a man taking a certain amount of time, however long that is, to not orgasm, or at least to not orgasm using his penis. And then, of course, using a cage is one of the best sort of tools to ensure that. I mean, you can be in chastity, just kind of on the honor system. You don't have to use a cage, but it's obviously easier, to achieve or to deliver on that when you're sort of it's out of your control and there's a cage on. It's an interesting topic because it's one that, like, it's a kink that I came around to. I think that I was obviously aware of it for a long time, but I wasn't sort of comfortable doing it for a long time because I hadn't established enough of a relationship, let's say, with a submissive to feel like I could ask him, to be in chastity for me. I had a lot of offers. I mean, just complete strangers reaching out and saying, "Can you hold my keys?" Or, "Can I be caged for you?" And it felt very inauthentic. And it also felt, in some cases, sort of dangerous. People talked about caging for 6 months or a year or longer. And there are probably some physiological side effects, right? If you sort of prevent the body from doing what the body does naturally, for such a long time. And that's, other people may pursue that and no judgment, but I wanted to sort of come around to it in a way that was comfortable for me. And there is in particular the month of October where people practice Locktober for a month. And a month is, sort of a constrained amount of time. I don't think it's long enough to do sort of physiological damage. And that even that took me a while because again, I felt a lot of the offers were kind of inauthentic or just very hollow. If it's someone that I don't really know, that it's like I'm just a stand-in. I could be anybody, right? Where they just want to be caged, they just want to be denied, and they're kind of trying to find any woman at all to sort of do that with. In fact, I would get sometimes messages where people would say, give me permission to orgasm. And I would say, like, just a complete stranger, and that I need permission from a woman, any woman. And again, this really just felt very uncomfortable and like hollow to me. And so I was lucky that I sort of built a relationship with somebody who's local, lives nearby. And when he wanted to do Locktober, we were able to talk about sort of why me, and also why he wanted this. And it was actually for him a way to focus his energy for the month on other things, not on orgasm or pursuit of sex. And in his case, he wanted to get in better shape. He wanted to work out. And so it made a lot of sense to me as to kind of why this was a mechanism that he was going to use to focus his mind on something healthy. And I wanted to be part of that as a friend. And so that was my first kind of longer term experience outside of just a scene where I lock somebody up just for fun for an hour, during play. And then I sort of unlock them when they've, quote, earned the unlock, right? So, after an hour of teasing, the cage comes off, right? But this was like my first longer term experience. And so, we can talk about it, but there's kind of just the playful part of it, which is kind of short term. And then there's the more committed pieces. What I haven't done, because I don't have a long-term partner, like Mr. C is not a cuck and he's not a submissive. And so I haven't had a long-term partner kind of in chastity to me on, again, a kind of a more permanent basis. But I have experimented for a couple weeks at a time with, my baby boy and kind of other submissives where I have sort of carried the key, even on like a necklace around my neck, that kind of thing, which is very theatrical. And there's a lot of like really interesting dynamics to it. It's very sort of delicious, right? That sort of denial, especially when you know it's not very long term or permanent. So it's an interesting kink. It's a fun one, and like I said, I was kind of a late adopter to it, but now that I'm doing it, it's a really fun one to explore.
Mm, you mentioned that it was this friend that's nearby that kind of made you, find where it belongs in your playbook. I'm curious, what were some of the things that this friend shared that made it make sense to you, or at least made you understand a little bit more about it, and consider it something that you'd actually want to do?
Yeah. So I guess for me, part of this is that I personally, given my own personality, have a lot of trouble. Like I wouldn't want to be denied. I wouldn't want to have to ask somebody permission to do what I want, you
Yeah, yeah,
know?
yeah.
And so it was kind of hard for me maybe to get my head around why somebody would voluntarily give up access to that part of their body and to that sort of pleasure, right? Even when they weren't playing with someone. Because again, I'm very sort of practiced in like when we're in person, we're doing a scene, we're playing, like everything's on the table. But that kind of long term, when somebody's away from me, that kind of like long distance, right? That I wasn't, I wasn't quite sure. Kind of, I understood, and I think it was a lot of it was around understanding sort of male psychology, maybe,
Mm,
and the extent to which it can sometimes be like the access to the penis can be a real distraction, right? People get distracted with edging, and they get distracted again with either by themselves, just kind of masturbation or the pursuit of sex, right? And I think in his case it was sort of both. It was him just saying, I need a break from kind of like partners, right? I just want to focus on myself. And also a break from, I mean, let's say just kind of masturbation, right? Like just like focus on healthier sort of outlets, right? Again, I think in his case it was getting in shape. So it was like a month of, exercise and maybe focusing on other things, work, family. And it was again kind of an external way to force that to happen. And so, it made sense from both a physical standpoint and also a psychological standpoint that it was going to be a positive thing. I will say that he wasn't denied for the entire month because, that's not what it has to be. It's just because you cage somebody doesn't mean that automatically, like the whole point is just denial. It's actually ownership. It's actually you being in charge of whether that person does or doesn't get to orgasm. And so in
mm,
his case, we did a mid month, sort of like midway, halfway through the month, 2 weeks in. We did a special scene together, and he was able to orgasm, but in the way that I wanted him to. I'm topping someone in a specific way, and
mm,
so it was kind of a reward. And then kind of the cage went back on for the next couple of weeks, and so I thought that was good too. Like I said, for me to sort of get my arms around that it isn't just this, just denial, which seems to me very hollow. It's
mm,
more of a like just putting somebody else in charge. And I love being in charge. So that makes sense. Um, I think the other piece around it is again that sort of, letting someone else be in charge. Um, and so that's like I said, that really aligned with sort of my philosophy of domination. I can do that even remotely, but it was really important to me that he be somebody who's nearby, and somebody that I know well. So if something happened during the course of the month and he needed that cage off for whatever reason, he was just, 20 minutes away. The idea of doing this with someone from a very long distance where they mail the key to me and I have it, just seemed more like less pragmatic and a bit more dangerous in a way, right? Where I mean, that person's going through their normal daily life. What if they need to go to a doctor's appointment or something all of a sudden, right? There's some kind of emergency and it's on, right? I mean, I know some of the cages people can kind of sneak their way out of because penises are very sneaky. But if it's correctly sized, that's difficult to do. So again, I just wanted that fail-safe mechanism to be there, that I was nearby and that we could remove it if it was needed, and that made me feel like a lot more responsible, I think, or like yeah, like I felt like more responsible dominant doing it that way than just having somebody on the other side of the country or the other side of the world, and me having that person locked for a predetermined amount of time and not having any like release valve in a sense, for kind of normal life, which is important to me. So that's what it is. I think he helped me understand the motivation. Again, both physical and psychological motivation behind it for him. And in the spirit of kind of, liking the person and feeling friendship with the person, wanting to help with that, right? Which is a lot of the way that I'm motivated anyway as a top, right? Is kind of I want to see fantasies fulfilled or see something that's good for someone. And so it played into that pretty well. Um,
Mm.
there's one other thing, and I don't know if you're going to mention it because I know that it's like a less familiar space for you personally, but one other area of interest around caging the penis in particular that now I'm very familiar with from a number of my submissives is that it encourages men to seek alternative ways to orgasm, and the typical alternative way to orgasm is from anal play. And so, especially for someone who is really trying to achieve that sort of anal orgasm through the prostate,
Mm.
but it's hard to do in the beginning. It's hard to learn how to do that. It takes some practice. And so sometimes if the penis is available, you are kind of you may not work so hard on that anal orgasm because you have this alternative that's much easier available to you. And so it's a temptation. If you take the temptation away and the penis is no longer available, and the only way that you're going to get an orgasm, like the only possible way you're going to get an orgasm is through anal play and through the prostate, you are that much more motivated to really, practice, to really train yourself. And so that I think for some folks I know that I cage is the motivation, right? It's basically, I want to achieve this other thing, which is much harder to do, and you have to take away the easy option from me to make sure that I really work harder at that more difficult option that is something that I really do want to achieve. And for some men, actually, is ultimately a more satisfying, harder, stronger orgasm. But again, they may not get there if they can always sort of default to the easy thing. So that's another way that caging, I've used it in a way that I think is good, right? Especially for the kink side. And obviously, I love pegging. I love sort of anal play, prostate play. So I love the fact that it's encouraging people to go down that route and not to give in to the easy temptation of just, okay, I'll just jerk off.
Okay. So one thing, I mean, that comes to mind is like with the cage itself, does it have to be is there like a one size fits all, or does it have to be sized for the person? And like, does it mean they don't get any erection when it's on, or
Generally, yes. And so that's a great question. So there are many different sizes. There are inverted cages where the penis is actually it becomes an innie. You push it inward. In the case of some folks who are growers, right, who are very, very soft when they're flaccid, you can actually do that. Or cages that are completely flat. So again, there's like the penis doesn't extend out externally at all when the cage is on. And
Mm,
then there's various sizes, including very big ones that are quite generous, where, somebody who's not a grower, but a shower, right? Somebody who, when he's flaccid, is about the same size as he is when he's erect, except he's just flaccid. There's some very big ones. If somebody can become erect in the cage, and I mean, obviously it's just a piece of plastic or rubber in some cases. I mean, the metal ones are sturdier. That's usually not a great thing. It hurts. Like the penis is trying to become erect and it's being constrained. It's not ideal. It usually means the size is off. You do size them custom, or you can buy obviously just at a store or kind of online, sort of different sizes. I have found one sort of manufacturer who's really great. It's called Kink 3D, and he's on FetLife as well. And he creates them. It's a 3D printing process, so he creates them custom sized, and he's doing that now for a number of my playmates, where he talks to them, he explains to them how to measure for the right ring size. The ring is the part that goes around the balls, like the base, and then how to measure for the right sort of cage size as well. And his, because they're 3D printed plastic, are very lightweight. They're very comfortable for long-term caging. I mean, I've seen some really crazy ones that are just very like metal, very heavy, very uncomfortable. And there's a purpose to that too, right? Again, in a sort of short-term play, for example, you might want it as almost a torture device. But if you're using it for the longer run and you need to kind of live in it for a while and, shower and exercise and sort of do normal things, you do want it to be sized correctly. You want it to be really comfortable, lightweight, and sort of to the point where you can forget that it's there. And then at some point, the penis doesn't try to get hard. It sort of accepts the reality that it's constrained effectively. And that's what I mean about kind of, okay, what are the alternative ways to get pleasure, through prostate play? Let's pursue that instead, right? Because this is no longer available. So there's as many cages as one can possibly imagine out there, just all different kinds, from very, very high quality to just very flimsy. That suit people again for very short-term play versus, very serious long-term chastity. But the ideal situation is where, you're kind of pushing up against the cage, but it's the right size. It's so constrained that it doesn't really let you get very far in terms of an erection. And so therefore, again, you basically are losing access to that, and you have to think of other things for yourself, to either gain pleasure or frankly just to enjoy the denial.
Excuse me. So, um, is it ever like punishment? Like, is there ever a situation when it's used as punishment?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I think it can be so many things. It's such a wide-ranging thing. I
Mm,
think in a relationship, and I have some of this with my baby boy. Like I think it's a gift, right, that a man is giving to the woman, and he's saying, "I adore you, and I want you to be in charge of this. This belongs to you. It's yours."
mm,
And so you keep it, and the kind of the keeping of the key is sort of the the visualization of that, right? The key's around her neck, or it's on a bracelet, or it's wherever, and she keeps the key and it's hers. And then she can take it out. I mean, it being the penis, she can take it out and use it as much as she wants, or she can take it out and use it on someone else. If they're not a monogamous couple. But it's this in effect saying, like, I'm so committed to you. I'm so loyal to you, right? That I want you to literally physically have ownership of it, so that I can't use it without your permission. I mean, that's not a punishment, right? That's lovely. But it could be a punishment in the sense of, let's say you have a couple where somebody was there was an infidelity, right? Somebody cheated, and this is a way
mm,
of getting through that. This is the kind of the way you rebuild the trust is you say, okay, there was an infidelity, and now I'm going to, again, physically kind of manifest, like, give you this key, be caged so that that I'm not cheating on you, right? And that's a way to, again, it's a way to be punished, and it's a way to rebuild trust with the partner. I'm trying to think about what else. I mean, certainly it can be a punishment in the sense of CBT, like, cock and ball torture, right? And I think that that's valid too, right? That's a kink that I practice in a variety of ways. And so if something is extra tight, it's uncomfortable, it's, I mean, that's a way to use it too. I tend to mix it up in terms of, it's obviously denial, but there's some pleasure to it. So for example, I'll have the cage on during play, and then I'll use a vibrator on the cage in different ways, which can be very, very, very pleasurable. And it's, again, kind of a way to explore pleasure that's different than the typical way that a man uses his penis, which is sort of stroking it.
mm,
So it's almost an experimentation. And then again, in the context of sort of having it on and then doing anal play, again, it's that sort of impetus or encouragement to really explore anal play. The
mm,
way that I've positioned it to people is like, for a man, when you're young, when you're just a kid, and I think I've said this to you before in the pegging pod that we did, is, you discover how to masturbate, right? When you're 9, 10, 11 years old. And it's an experimentation. It's a process of figuring out your own body. Like, how does this work? How do I touch it? What works for me? And then I think when people grow up, that a lot of times that experimentation sort of ends, right? You kind of know what works for you, and that's sort of it, right? But to be encouraged to keep experimenting with other parts of your body that you maybe didn't use before, but that are available for this purpose too, for pleasure, Sometimes for adults, like you have to be properly motivated. And again, if you have a guaranteed way to orgasm that you already know about, it's hard to be motivated to try something different, which is not guaranteed and is more challenging to achieve, right? And so,
Mm,
how do you kind of get that motivation back, right? You have to take away the other options. So, that's in effect a punishment too, but it's a punishment towards a really good cause. If somebody's
mm.
really looking to explore learning how to have that alternative way, sometimes superior way, to bring themselves pleasure.
Wow. I mean, there's so many layers to this one simple thing as putting something on a penis.
Kink complex, as you know, many
Yeah.
complex.
So I mean, there's the physical aspect, there's the mental aspects, and then there's just, the control and the psychological and the
Yes.
physiological. It's this There's so many layers to this, and I find it so fascinating. Like something I've always been thinking about, like how does it work? And so I'm really grateful that you're breaking it down in such simple terms. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Definitely. One last thought, again, maybe like I said, would be kind of harder for you to ask this question because it's not sort of in your normal, kind of range of play. But one thing that I do a lot of feminization of men, right? So guys who are trying to be feminized, and so de-emphasizing the penis is really important from that standpoint too. So if you think about someone who's sort of dressed up, a wig and stockings and like a lingerie, and they're being feminized and they're taking on kind of this sort of more feminine identity as a bottom. De-emphasizing, making especially if somebody, let's say, is hung, right? You make the penis small so that they don't have to worry about that part of themselves. Or like I said, you just sort of you hide it away in a way.
Mm,
That's something that I think, like say, psychologically for the person allows them to explore that other role. It makes it easier for them to explore that other role without being distracted, by the penis, which oftentimes will kind of turn their brain back away from being feminized, away from being kind of a bottom, being used, being penetrated, to the normal way that they see themselves, which is as a penetrator, somebody with a penis. So it's, again, this is obviously super consensual, but it's ways for people to put into practice, sort of the different ways they want to try to explore their identities or see themselves. And so it can be a really useful tool from that standpoint too. But yeah, I mean, I think to your point, there's so many layers of complexity. I mean, the penis, the phallus, is just so important, to men, and also to our society. It's such a big sort of symbol of just kind of human society, right? The kind of phallic element. That anything that sort of locks it away and minimizes it or denies it, there's just
mm,
all of these different layers to that as to one would want to do that and explore it. And I've
mm.
really been enjoying it. And that's why, to go back to the beginning of the pod, is that sort of very hollow and inauthentic, kind of like, here, hold my cage. I don't care who you are. You're just a random stranger, but I just want to be denied for you. And like, none of that worked for me because I knew that this has so much meaning ultimately, that
Mm,
I only want to participate in it when, I can, like I said, have some authenticity, to
mm,
that
mm.
meaning, when it kind of really makes sense for me to be part of it. So I'm glad that I sort of held off and explored it on those terms with people that I care about, and in ways that again, like, felt meaningful.
I think that is also tied to the whole one of the things that stands out for you is that you're not doing it for pay or like for content. It's just part of who you are. Like this is what you do. You're not doing it because you expect to get paid for it. So it makes it easier for you to be like, no, I don't need to do that until it gets to a point where you're like, okay, for me, this makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
No, I love it. It's always great to talk to you, Aphrodite, and thanks for opening up my eyes and enlightening me and the audience to this whole new world of chastity and caging. Thanks so much for coming to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me as always.
You're so thoughtful, you're so thoughtful. You're so thoughtful, you're so you like it too.